Welcome everybody. Welcome to ImpactChat, the second in our fortnightly series. It's great to see you all here. Before we start, I'd like to acknowledge the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the first peoples of Australia, the traditional owners of the lands and waters we're privileged to live, work and play on, lands and waters that have never been ceded. And so on behalf of us all, I pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. Impact is a completely volunteer-led and driven charity, and we make a difference to Victorian women and children fleeing extreme violence at home. While we're a charity, we don't give charity. What we do is give gifts and services with dignity, and we give dignity with gifts and services. Any donations that we're receiving at the moment are going to be directed to our court childcare program, which will be a free offering to parents needing that support at Moorabbin Court on family violence days. I need to tell you that we are recording tonight, so if you're anxious about your face being shown, please turn off your video. But we would love to see your faces because that makes it feel as if we're a little bit more interactive and a little bit more like community together. As Lara and Joe chat, Joe will be keeping an eye on the chat function in Zoom. So if you have any questions, please type them there, and I'm sure that Lara and Joe will address them through the course of the evening. It's really an honour to have Lahra Carey and Joe Stanley here with us tonight. And with that, I'm passing you over to Joe.
Thank you so much, Kathy. It is a real pleasure to be here. I'm so pleased that you asked me. It's wonderful to join you all in your living rooms or your kitchen, or maybe it's in your laundry if you're folding your washing while you're watching. I know I do a lot of that whenever I'm engaging with the wonderful things that are out there online. So thank you so much for inviting us into your house and your home and your evening. My name is Joe Stanley. It's my great pleasure to be the host of this conversation tonight. I'm a radio and TV host, a podcaster, a columnist. I'm a bit of a Jill of all trades, but what mostly I am is very passionate about gender equality and supporting women, and particularly victim survivors of family violence. So it is my great pleasure to support Impact for Women this evening. I really want to encourage you to go to their website, impactforwomen.org.au, and explore all of the incredible things that they do to support victim survivors of family violence. And yes, donate. There is a very clear donate button there, and I want to encourage you to do that this evening. So I'm really pleased to invite Lahra Carey into this conversation. I want to make sure that she's there, and I'm not sure about the technology of this. So say hello, Lahra.
Hi, Joe.
There you are. Yeah. It works. So let me just give a little bit of your bio. Lahra is an entrepreneurial business builder, communication specialist, and experienced non-executive board director. She helps businesses tell their stories through her PR consultancy Narrative, trains executives to deal with the media through Newsflash Media. Perhaps all of us could learn a little thing or two from Lahra, and assists organisations manage their crisis communications. Let's hope we never need you and crisis control, Lahra. But once upon a time, Lahra was on the other side of the media as a journo for the ABC. She is also a mother of three and widow of Ben Cowan. Lahra, it's just really lovely to be sharing this conversation with you.
So great to be here. Thank you.
It's nice to put on some makeup and feel like we're a little bit out of the house in a very comfortable way, don't you think?
Like a rusty skill. It took ages. Forgotten now.
It's true. I mean, you think about if this technology wasn't around 10 years ago and we were hit with this kind of pandemic, it would have been much, much harder for all of us to cope. But you were a journo long before the kind of technology that we have as just standard nowadays. You know, you didn't... I believe there were not even mobile phones when you were a journo. So how did that change your job? How did you go about gathering information and filing stories?
the weird thing was we didn't need carrier pigeons and we did it. In fact, I was at the ABC when we got computers and we had a VDT allowance, which until I left was still built in. It was the visual display terminal allowance, because we'd gone on strike. This was going to change the world. And in fact, it did. There was an old guy who was wonderful, one of my first mentors, who was the morning sub-editor. And he never got used to the technology. So we used to have 6 copies of Carbon with an old manual typewriter. And we'd type out our stories and then distribute the stories to each of the editors and what was known as the copy taster, who was the person who would then take the edits that were written onto these pieces of paper, type them up into the final version, which was then given back to the sub-editor, who'd again check it and then give it back until the final version was given to the newsreader. And this would happen on the hour, every hour. Anyway, when we got computers and he was shown how everything went into a different folder and you didn't have to do this, he would stand there and press print to print out all of the stories that everyone had written, do it all manually, give it to the copy taster, who would then put it into the computer. So yeah, different times of people just, and no mobile phones, as you say, I was a police reporter for a while where I'd carry the big, heavy tape recorder to do these interviews at a crime scene, and then dash across to the milk bar and say, can I use your phone? And they'd go, here you go. And it was the old rotary dial phone, which my children have no idea what that is. And I'd pick up the handset, undo the bottom bit, put the alligator clips on connected to my tape recorder, and send back the sound grabs. So yeah, we managed.
That's such an incredible thing to imagine. It really wasn't that long ago. And I, even though it was a fairly, I imagine, quite challenging thing to get information gathered and back to whoever was filing it, you were, though, reporting really, not pandemics, but disasters, times, crises, times at which people were very much, I suppose, fighting for survival, and really you saw people, in times of much distress.
Yeah, you did. You were. And you had more, PR wasn't really even an industry. Not when I started. You had access to the thought leaders and decision makers as they were thinking and making decisions. There wasn't this incredible, there was pressure on politicians, but it was a longer term game. It wasn't, the news cycle's just gotten so fast. As all our lives have. Even at the beginning in PR, I'd have time to write a proposal and mail it. Now it's like, can you just give me 3 dot points on an email? And life, it's changed so much like that. We had access to crime scenes that you wouldn't get access to today. We had access, I had all of the ministers that came government in my black book, which also I found the other day, and it had the number for Buckingham Palace, so I don't remember why I needed to call them, but you had the phone book, and if something had happened and there was a story in the paper that you wanted to follow up and the name of the person was Smith, you would go through all the Smiths and ring them and go, sorry to wake you, just till you found the right one. So it was a different time, but we got the news done.
And actually, I know, because I started in radio, we had obviously mobile phones and computers by then, but we didn't have social media. So the little black book, you were hired based on how big your little black book was, weren't you? In a lot of ways.
And it's interesting because on the dark side in PR, I was trying to find someone about a year or two ago, and a guy who'd been bitten by a shark, and we were doing a shark related campaign. He had Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, everything. I could not actually talk to him. I had to message him through all that, but unless he wanted, and the only way to contact him was through his manager. Whereas in old days, it was faster in that sense because you could actually talk to a person.
Yes, yeah. So do you think it's harder for journos now, because there's obviously the speed with which we are gathering information and we just consume news so quickly, and also I think under much more scrutiny perhaps, I don't know. Do you think it's harder for journos now, or do you think because you have so much information at your fingertips it might be easier?
It's an interesting question. I think it is easier in the sense that everything's much more organised, and if you want the official policy on, you can Google it, where before the information wasn't as aggregated, but you certainly had more of a chance for an exclusive. They're few and far between now, and there also wasn't such a division I don't recall between the sort of the left and the right in reporting. You know, I mean, I didn't only work for the ABC, that was the majority of my career. But, you know, and we, you know, during election campaigns at the ABC, they would count the lines to make sure there was a fair number for each of the parties.
Really?
Yep, they were counted. But, you know, I used to be asked, I had an amazing news editor who'd say, you know, think about who is manipulating you. Where now it's a press release that's often just actually word for word, even with the spelling mistakes sometimes, you know, republished. And social media has made even news this kind of blurring between, you know, sponsorship and news. We've got influencers who sometimes it's hard to know, are they paid, are they not paid? And so I think there's a world where definitely my teenagers firstly think that everyone's manipulating them. They don't actually trust anyone.
Right. That's probably good.
You know, seeing through politicians. So I was having an interesting conversation with my daughter Alex, you know, about talking about this conversation coming up and saying it's so, you know, everything's so scripted now that there's no room for authenticity. We were talking about the cartoon in the Australian newspaper about Kamala Harris and, you know, why that was offensive, or was it, or can people go out on a limb? And she said, but it's good because then they're more careful with their words. But in that, you know, you don't get the sort of the real, no one can make a mistake, you know, you're pilloried for it. So you've got to stick to the script. And that didn't happen when I started.
It's absolutely true that no one is allowed to make a mistake, and the outrage brigade that jumps up and down. I often think you people must be perfect because you're so willing to point a finger and point out when someone's done something wrong. You talk about authenticity, and a lot of what you do now on this side of the fence is stepping in when someone is in crisis, their career is in crisis. Can you tell us about that work, and how do you go about helping someone when perhaps, I don't know, is their reputation on the line, or is there a crisis they're managing within their organisation? Tell us about that.
You know, it's really interesting because it's that fear factor, and it happens on the other side too, on the positive side, where you're asking somebody, you know, at the end of the day, we call ourselves storytellers, but what we actually do is distill all the information and go, but how will this best connect with your audience? Mm-hmm. And if someone's under pressure, the last thing they want to do is make themselves vulnerable, because there is a vulnerability to telling your own story. And, you know, when you've got them in their worst, darkest moment, you know, it's the fight or flight or the help me make this go away. And there's lots of times where you can't make it go away. But often Steve, my business partner, and I will rehearse because, you know, they're given key messages and they're given pages and pages of, you know, facts to remember and key messages and the wording that you use. And we sometimes say, do you know what? Just say what you'd say if you could say what you wanted to say. And it's 9 times out of 10, it's so much better. And we say, why can't you say that? And then it's like everyone looks at each other, and the spin doctors look at each other, and, you know, the policy people look at each other, and then there's this sort of leap of faith of, okay, you know, I can actually say this. But you have departments sometimes that are quasi-government departments where they don't want to throw the minister in it. That's going to be a problem. You know, everybody's protecting their own backs and the backs of their bosses and their stakeholders. And so it's a real, you know, it's this conundrum of around and around.
But also it feels as though, and not just our politicians, but I'm sure everybody has a sense of how they're presenting themselves when they speak publicly. And it does make me wonder how much of what we see is real, and how are people authentic in that environment? Are they ever?
Well, so the interesting phenomenon I've found, the most fascinating thing to me during the pandemic has been this live press conference that's been on social media, you know. And at first I started thinking, who the hell thinks this is a good idea? Like the role of a journalist is to, you know, take a lot of information and repetitive answers and distill it and, you know, make it, you know, again, I'm going to quote my business partner, Steve, who calls news information wrapped up as entertainment. Right. You know, and essentially one way or another, we're going to take the interesting bits. When I was a court reporter, I walked out when it got to boring legal argument, you know. So why would anyone want to sit and listen to all of these key messages repeated and, you know, but people are fascinated. They're suddenly seeing whether they think it's the authentic side of the politicians or And in this transit, first we were watching them be very critical. You saw all these heckling emoji-ites, and then we saw this phenomenon with Andrew Probyn asking the questions in the press conference with, I hope that people who are listening, sort of saw this TikTok phenomenon.
Oh, yes.
Of the girl.
Andrew, yeah.
You don't run the press conference.
Yes, I love it.
Yes, and she was asked why did you do this? And she said, because it was fascinating. I didn't know that, journalists were spoken to like that. And Andrew was asked for his reaction. He's like, it was just another day in the office. That's what happens. So people had this insight. And then what's happened as we've gone along is suddenly you've had these, the members of the public who are suddenly very defensive of how the politicians are being treated by the media. And we've got this hashtag, that's not journalism, that's emerged also in this context. So it's really interesting how we're going to go back to, it's almost like people have almost lost faith in the authentic storytelling of the media.
Well, I'm noticing a comment there from Michelle Korn, who says journalists seem so scripted these days and many seem to exaggerate or twist the facts and thus sensationalize the news. So does that mean, I kind of see Michelle's point there, because as a member of the public, I'm watching what the journos are doing in the press conference, and I'm thinking, well, do I align my values with the way they're talking? Do I align my values with the politics? Like, it's like there's many layers to now I've got to decide what I believe.
Yeah, that's right. And how do you find the truth? That's, again, it's been very interesting having, raising teenagers who have believed everything they were told, as little ones, you don't cross the road because whatever it is. And then, seeing them go, hang on, where did this come from? Who's the source of this? What else have they written?
Yeah.
And it's really hard to know who to believe. And they're very onto, News Limited's place in the world politically and what they're pushing. And so, but there's no one anymore there's the ABC. We've still got the ABC completely.
Thank goodness. Well, I have a question for you on that with the journalists. Lisa Leonard Swan wants to know, how affected are journalists by the trolls?
Look, journalists are people too. I mean, it's interesting. I had a time I was writing a column for the Sunday Herald Sun, and I was allowed to write about anything I wanted, and you sort of develop a persona. And I'm sure, Joe, you understand this as a presenter as well. Partly it's not you. But the biggest reaction I ever got was I had a lot of trouble breastfeeding, and it was a really bad experience for me with a child who is now 17, 6'1", almost never gets sick, and, was formula fed, but it was all the marketing. And I wrote this column around this and got such heavy, backlash, because there's no bigger issue when you're a new mother than breastfeeding.
Yeah. Yes.
I was kind of going, if it suits you, great, but let's lay off those of us who it didn't. And it was hurtful. Like, I felt like I was being public, and the editors kept saying, it's not, don't take it personally. That's what these guys do, but it hurts. It does.
It's, I think, impossible for it not to hurt. And, even someone like Andrew Bolt, I often wonder, does he at some point sit in a dark, quiet room by himself and really feel the amount of people that dislike him? I mean, obviously he does things to be aggravating, I suppose, but it's got to, at some point, permeate whatever is happening there, hasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a line, there's healthy debate or there's disagreement. Right. And I think that's fine. But when it becomes personal attacks,
yes,
it's not okay for anyone.
I agree. So talking about authenticity, when you're perhaps managing someone's response in a crisis, are you asking them to really assess who they are and how to be authentic in the way that they present their message? Do people actually have to really think about what parts of themselves they're going to share with the world and be willing to be judged?
No, I think it's scripted authenticity. I think, the way I explain it when I'm working with someone who hasn't done this before is I take all of the information. So I'm not a lawyer, where you can't tell me because I'll have to use it in court or whatever. I take it all and then go, right, there's no one truth, and so if some things are left out and some things are relevant and some things go better to the case, then we will not ever lie, but, tell the version that best suits the needs of that story. And I think that once you do that, people feel like they've got a bit of a parachute, because there's this instinct to go, but I've got to say everything. I've got to answer it all like I'm in court, or, and you don't have to.
But I would argue, I mean, all of us are going around in life telling the parts of us that best serve that situation, aren't we? Isn't that what we do?
So you come across, become a spin doctor, you'd be great.
Evil when I say that. I just feel like everybody does that, whether you realize it or not.
That's true, but in a corporate sense particularly, there's a sense of, well, we're owed all the information. And I'm not talking about hiding information that shareholders are entitled to know or cheating regulatory bodies out of information, but I'm saying if it's a personal thing or it's an explanation as to how something happened, you've got to think carefully about how you're going to construct the narrative, because it's yours.
Of course. So we do find ourselves worldwide at a time when we're having to really dig deep and find some inner strength that perhaps for some of us we've never had to do before. And there's a real sense, I think, we talk a lot about resilience, and do we have it or not? Does it come naturally? How do we manage this time of great uncertainty and great anxiety, and for many a real loss, whether it's financial or losing a way of life, or losing loved ones. And you have lost a partner, you lost your husband, Ben, and yet, that shatters your life, of course, in every level of that. And yet you're here and you appear to be thriving. You're living and loving and working and parenting, and you do appear to be thriving. So that speaks to your resilience. And I feel like we can learn some things from you this evening with regard to that. So can you tell us about losing Ben and what happened and what it was like for you?
Gosh, lots of questions in there.
I know. So I'm sorry for bombarding you with that, but I guess I sort of wanted to put it in context in and around, that I feel like people's stories, you're talking about what stories and your narrative and how you can control it and share it. And I think we all have stories for the benefit of others to learn.
Yeah. I think, and I'm not sure if the first bit of losing Ben has much synergy to the pandemic, but it was definitely a journey. So, in the beginning, you think you will never be okay. You'll never, I just couldn't imagine going on and sat in my walk-in wardrobe with the door closed, crying a lot. And I don't think, if I'm honest with myself, firstly, it shocked me how dependent I was on my husband's sort of encouragement and support. I thought I was pretty independent. And I think we were, I don't know what people would have said of who was the kind of the dominant person in the relationship. We both had our own careers. We both, co-parented and loved our kids. And I took probably a lead in the house and he took a lead with the finances. So, consequently, I'd never paid an electricity bill, didn't know how much anything, around the house cost. He structured things in a very definite way. But they were the things, aside from the practical things that I had to learn, it was this idea of who was going to be my advocate, and I really didn't think I could do any of it. And slowly, not only do you rebuild because you have to, and I'm not sure, sometimes I'm part of a widows group where I look at the women who've lost their husbands, after, they're retired and they've got grandchildren. I had to for my kids. I know that was the only reason I got up every day for the beginning. It was just like, and they, needed me to be okay. And so this version of me emerged as, well, I'm going to present this okay to the world because they need to see that. But inside, I lost my confidence. I lost my self-belief. I had been on a path where I was going to do something quite different with my career, and we had both kind of worked out this model. I was flying, and then it was like wings are clipped. That's it. And slowly you go, well, not only is it not it, because I had to learn new skills. So it's like a friend of mine who's a widow explained it. She said, when I cried and said, how do I get through this? She said, you know what? I said, will I ever feel the same? And she said, you won't feel the same, but it's like losing a limb, but then other senses become more heightened. And that is really, you know, true. When I started watching YouTube videos to fix the dishwasher, you know, and realized I can do this, then I burst into tears that I had to, but then go, no, but I've done this, you know. So there were new skills learned and the confidence returned in a different way. But in one sense also, I stayed married and continued to hear his voice in my head and continued to forge the path forward with our kids that we were going to. And so I could hear his voice often, you know, when I felt like I just couldn't do it or couldn't go on. And then things would happen that would work in my favor. And I had this sense, this stupid sense that I still have sometimes, that, you know, he's watching me and he's kind of helping me when things go right. So I talk to him a lot still, and second guess myself and then check in with what he would say, because when you're with someone for that long and you know each other's sort of thoughts, you know, that's there. But I think in the meantime, I've got to accept somewhere along the line, I developed different skills and became someone different, a different version of me. And the widows, you know, the widows say that, you know, you have to learn to do everything again. The way you eat, the way you sleep, the way you empty the bins when you didn't have to, the way you make dinner, the way you become, you know, this family that we had, you know, we had to close the space that he no longer, you know, sort of operated in, you know, the five of us. And in the beginning, it was a huge space. And at one stage I dared to say to my kids recently, you know, we were talking about a holiday we'd had, and they always do this, which is the best holiday we've ever had? And I said, well, obviously not the last one, because Dad, you know, can't be the best if Dad wasn't there. And they turned and said, that's not fair. We have a great, you know, you can. Like, they keep giving me permission to acknowledge that I don't have to say, yes, but there's a big thing missing, that I can path this path. And he's still with us, but not in the same way. So it's a very long-winded answer, I guess.
No, it's really incredibly honest and authentic, let's say. Is that the theme for our conversation tonight? Is it possible, do you think, then, to be deeply sad and grieving and at the same time have happy moments?
Yes, it is, absolutely. But it's the other way. It's like, it's every happy moment comes with this sadness as well. You know, I remember sitting in my big thing is musicals. I love musicals. I love watching my kids on stage. I love, you know, and the first musical that they were in, by the way, he used to sleep through them. So it wasn't like it was something we shared, but, you know, there I am in this moment, just sort of so excited and loving this moment and, you know, crying my eyes out because he's not there. And you know, everything that's an amazing moment is like, oh, I wish he was here. You know, my son learned to drive, and it was like, oh, he would love this, you know. So I'm going to have that my whole life, I think.
So in those first few months, the first year, I can't speak to what it's like. How did you live? How do you get out of bed? I often hear people say, oh, you know, you've just got to get out of bed and do it, but how?
There's something called widow's fog, and I think that was part of well, firstly, there were the kids, so I had to get out of bed. And I didn't want to do anything. And Ben died in the January, and they were on school holidays. And then they went back to school, and I still felt like I was incapable of really doing anything. And they kind of went, why are you still here? They weren't used to me at home, you know? And I was like, so they're like, no, you should go back to work. So I did. And that was great, because I felt like this was something, and this comes back to this idea of, you know, the pandemic and control, where I felt like this was something I could do. I didn't have to learn any new skills, because the rest of my life I was in free fall. But the thing they don't tell you is when you lose your partner, there's a shit ton of administration and bureaucracy that is so boring to talk about, you know, things like going through probate, and he didn't have a will, and he had a business with partners, I'm still at the tail end of some of it, almost 4 years on, you know, where nobody, you know, people think about you rocking in a corner and grieving, but I actually found it really great. I could rail against the system and the, you know, accountants and the lawyers and, you know, sort of, but there, in the middle of that, there was also this uncertainty of where do I fit in with his family, for example.
Yes.
am I still welcome there, or am I just, you know, and I said that to my psychologist at one point, and she said, look, you're the mother of, like, from my mother-in-law's point of view, you know, you are the mother of her grandchildren.
Of course.
And it took us a little while, but I've got to say, I was incredibly lucky. Ben's family have been amazing. Like, nothing actually, like, we went through a dip where everyone was trying to work it out, but nothing's changed. I'm still the port of call. I still feel absolutely, you know, part of that family. But I know a lot of people lose that as well. So you've got to redefine everything. And a lot of people talk about their relationship with their friends completely changes. They're not welcome, you know, to go out as couples. And again, I was so well looked after. I had what I called the force field friends, a group of my best girlfriends who aren't even best friends with each other really, but knew each other from every birthday. I have a dinner with these girls, and they just went right. And, you know, developed little, like with one of my girlfriends, developed a code where if I am with my sister, where if I needed help, I'd say, could you bring me some soda water? And then she'd make whoever it was who was bothering me go away. So, you know, you sort of just develop sort of systems, but it was a descent into hell.
And was there a practice or a strategy, or were there things that you did that assisted you in getting through it? That really, I suppose I'm thinking, you know, if we're in crisis, if we're in trauma, what can we do? What can we turn to, and what works for you?
Well, I was recommended by another widow friend to go to alcohol, but that's not my thing. So I did a lot of binge watching at weird hours of weird programs. And I wrote a book, you know, because I wasn't sleeping. So I just wrote it out. That was my thing. And I know that a lot of people have done journaling through this period. I'm not a meditator, but I did use yoga as a bit of a grounder. And then just sort of, it was, you know, routine and the unbelievable, I mean, maybe I'm just lucky, but I think that a lot of people have kids who just bring them up, you know, being in that space with the day-to-day reality of kids who just see today and today and today makes you focus on, you know, what they need.
How was it parenting your 3 children and navigating that incredible trauma and grief with them or for them or beside them? How does it work? What is your role in that?
I think my role, I've often felt, and I've felt this when Ben was alive too, where we are reigning, you know, we're just like holding on, and there are these wild horses kind of dragging us. And in fact, interestingly, one of the last, the last trip that a couple of years before Ben died, actually, we did a trip, we traveled a lot with the kids. And there was one place where we wanted to go to this restaurant that was like recommended and off the beaten track and down the side street, and the kids were hungry. And at one point, the 3 of them, and they weren't even teenagers, they hadn't even reached 12, and they stopped, the 3 of them, and went, we're hungry, we're going here. And we looked at each other and we went, oh my God, they've worked out that there's more of, like, that they have power, you know. So without Ben, sometimes I'm just like carried along on this tide. And, you know, they were the ones that kept me real and would not at all let me go down in self-pity. And sometimes I do devolve, and one of them just goes, nah, you know, you're fine, you're great, you know, we're not going to do this. And they're the ones that decided, and I don't think they ever talked about it together, that they were not going to be victims. They hate people pointing out, you know, or having to talk about the fact that their father died. In fact, one of my daughters was saying, if someone asks her what her father does, she says he's an investment banker, which is what he was. And so whereas I'm kind of quite inclined to go, oh, but I'm a widow and I need a cheaper deal, or, you know, I don't know what I'm doing.
But you do.
Where they, you know, they just won't have a bar of it. And they decided they would remember their father with laughter, with love, with, you know, stories, which they still tell. And it's the same ones for them over and over, because they had him for such a short time. But it wasn't going to be crying in the corner, and they were not going to be victims. And there was, you know, they do wonder sometimes, they will observe relationships that other people have with a father at this age, and I know they wonder what it's like or how it would be or what he would do, but they have questions, and they just will not allow me to do what I'd like to do sometimes, which is just sob.
In those early days though, and even just, I mean, I don't know how you manage, it's interesting to me that you are a person that delivers news and information to people, and then you found yourself having to manage the most devastating piece of news to share with your children. How do you go about that in that moment, and then further, you know, that next hours and days when you're in your own space of grief?
You know, that was probably the, you know, the lowest point of the lowest points of the lowest points, because also he died so unexpectedly. So I think it's quite different for people when they've had a long illness and they're prepared. Not that the losing is any less devastating, but the sudden shock of it. And you know, I handled the whole thing so badly, you know. I mean, honestly, it is a bit of you would be in a comedy if you were listening inside my head, because, and you know, I write this in my book that I start where he landed on a cliff top. He was paragliding and landed on a cliff top. And I knew that there'd been an accident, and we were the next town away we were staying at our beach house, and he landed where he usually does, but badly. And we were at the pools at Lawn. So, you know, it was a good 20-minute drive away. And I got a call from one of our really close friends who said he's had an accident, but he was conscious. And my first thought was, you know, oh, he's broken a leg or something. And I was supposed to be going back to work the next day, and he was staying on with the kids. And I had pushed him to do this flight because he needed to be picked up whenever he flew, because he'd land on the beach and I'd have to go and get him. And it was always really inconvenient and whatever. But I said, look, this is your last chance, because I'm not going to be here tomorrow. So when we heard that he'd had an accident and he might have been airlifted to Geelong Hospital, I quickly got the kids out of the pool. And so far from anyone's mind was the fact that this would kill him, was when I said, come on, we got to go. And they said, why? And I said, Dad's had been in an accident. They thought a car accident. They went, what? And Alex started crying. And I said to her, no, it's not a car accident. He's just landed badly and he might, you know, have a broken bones or something. And she went, oh, okay, that's fine. So, you know, it wasn't even, and I always jump the crisis manager in me to the worst scenario. And I was driving there, you know, with my girlfriend was driving me to the cliff top, and she was saying, don't jump to the worst, don't jump to the worst. Conclusion, but I said, this is what I'm built to do. So I am thinking of the worst case scenario. And we got to where the beach was, and I had to get from the beach to the cliff top. And I'm in my bathers, and I'm not that fit. And it was a long way, and I'm running. And in my head, I'm thinking, you know, if this was a movie, I should be like racing there, and then you'd see me kind of, but I couldn't. I sort of then wheezing and puffing, and then an emergency vehicle came along and thankfully picked me up and took me there. And then I had to climb up on the cliff top, and they had like a rope thing. I'm scared of heights and I don't do ropes. So I'm there, and this whole thing in my head is going, this is not anything like anything I've seen. And then I was struck with sort of the horror of the situation, but I still thought that he was going to be okay. It became apparent that he wasn't. And there were two police on top of the cliff. And they start asking me a whole lot of questions that I should be able to answer, like how old he was and when his birthday is and how long we'd been married. And my brain is going, what? Oh, hang on. I've seen this in an episode of something. How should I be behaving? You know, you've got no frame of reference. And then the tide started coming in, and I didn't want to leave, and we had to go. And so the whole thing was just, and then I had to tell the kids, and I had said he'd be fine. And so then I'm going through my head going, okay, I need to do this properly. I need to do this right, because I've just screwed up the whole farewell scene, and that's gone really badly. Like, I'm having this weird dialogue because the whole thing hadn't connected, you know, it wasn't real. So, you know, I went back to the house where our friend had been with the kids, you know, and I just lost my words. I just said, and they went, how's Dad? And I said, he's gone. They go, what do you mean he's gone? I said, he died. And that was the best I could do. Me, the storyteller, who, if I had it in a movie, it would have been so different. And Alex started screaming at me, you promised me he'd be okay. And I had. And then her twin, Charlie, just shut down and didn't speak for about another week. And Mitch started sobbing and sobbing. And all the way back home, we drove home, packed suitcases, taking all this stuff, and my friend's going, just leave it. And I'm like, no, I had to do something. I'm in the car all the way home, and the two sobbing ones kept asking questions about that. I kept saying, it's all going to be all right. It's all going to be all right. It's all going to be, but you know, you feel like you're some actor in some really terribly written movie. And I kind of, how many times I've gone, I wish I could do that again. You know?
It's a really, really devastating story, and thank you for your incredible honesty in sharing that. It's you know, it's powerful in its telling, and it's powerful in its it speaks to how our lives are kind of a series of rehearsals, and when you're pushed into a situation where you've got no frame of reference, it's interesting that you tend not to know how to sit in that space as that person, don't you?
Yeah, that's exactly right. You look for, hang on, how would someone else do this if this was a movie, or what have I seen that's like this, or what do I, you know, where you don't have any bearings at all. You know, and I think that's in a different way, you know, to sort of come full circle, what people are dealing with now in this pandemic, going, I have no markers for this. Like, I haven't been stuck in my house and not being able to see my friends and not make plans ever. So how do I do this?
And is there a voice for you that there's a right way of doing it? And if you don't do it the right way, people are going to wonder?
The pandemic bit?
No, your own experience.
Oh, yeah, I think that, yes, definitely. They expect to see something, you know, grief, which people have a frame of reference for if you haven't been through it yourself, which is, you know, on TV. I mean, even a friend, one of our best friends who lost her husband very recently, and her daughter, who's 15, said to me, this isn't like I thought it would be. This doesn't feel like, you know, and I said, yeah, it doesn't, because what you see and what people show you is not what the reality is. Very private, very, there aren't really words, and it hits you at different times for insignificant things and big things. And people want you to be okay, so you be okay. And I think that, you know, and you find it and you are okay. You move, you know, they can see all the markers of someone who's doing well and who's independently managing her life and, you know, earning a living and raising kids, and no one's on drugs yet. But, you know, so, you know, that's all. But there's something that just seismically changes, which you don't want to put out there because people don't want to see it.
Would you prefer not to show, though, that part of the process? Because obviously it is a very private thing. And in a lot of ways, I suppose, we put this coping veneer, if you want to call it that, we put that out there because is it easier for you as well?
Well, I think, you know, a couple of times a year I put something on Facebook, a long reflection, because I like to kind of educate people that I care about of, you know, that actually it's not over, you know, it's not like I've moved on. There's something else. And I even feel in those times hesitant, because I feel like, are people going to go, oh, that's so self-indulgent. Isn't she over this by now? Seriously. Like, you know, you kind of do feel like it is a bit self-indulgent. And especially when I really do count my blessings. I know how lucky I am. And the kids always say, we have the best life, Mum. You know, we're so lucky. It's great, you know, and I don't want to go, I sometimes I listen to it and I go, what? But what about this big thing, you know? So I think people don't want to think about the big thing unless and maybe tonight they're interested or they're not, I don't know, because some, you know, I don't know. I think it's a hard thing for people to think about, and it faces them with their own mortality.
Which is true, but I think that that's a valuable thing too. I think the hard things to face are always really great because you learn from them, surely. I have a question here from Lisa, who asks, has it made the relationship with your children stronger? And how are you dealing with COVID as a family?
The relationship with my kids, absolutely. It pulled us. When it first, I was terrified, like I say, where that big space was. And there was one incident quite early on where I tried to do something, you know, that was sort of a nice habit thing. And I said, this is what we do as a family. And Mitch said, we're not a family anymore.
Oh.
And that was, I thought my heart had just broken. But we got through that, and we got through a whole lot of stuff. And we started, the 3 things that I promised them after Ben died was that the things they needed, which is stay at the same school, they needed to stay in the same house. I was going to do whatever I could for that. And we only moved in recently, and they wanted to do the adventures that we'd always done as a family. And when we started traveling together, that was where it really pulled us, you know, together. And even though they sometimes fight, not much, and they know how to push each other's buttons and to irritate each other, incredibly close. And that has made COVID. The kids keep saying, isn't it great that we get along so well? And isn't it great that we've got each other? You know, it's really, I wish they'd learned to put glasses in the dishwasher and wipe a bench, because that would make me really happy. But they do fun things together.
Once they learn that, can they come here and teach my daughter? I'd be very appreciative of that. So, you know, we're talking about resilience and that we're all facing this unknown in COVID. And I do want to encourage you to ask a question now, if you wish to ask a question, because we're going to run out of time soon. But do you see that you have a perspective that's perhaps helpful or different in this pandemic because of your experience?
Yeah, I did say to my psychologist in the first lockdown, I said, this feels like such a relief, because everyone is now where I am. You know, I had this feeling since Ben died, you know, grief, someone put it in one of the groups, they say grief equals fear. And I was never afraid before, could do anything. And now it's constantly uncertainty, something's going to happen, and it does. And then I think I'm not going to be able to handle it. And that kind of, I'm so used to living with that now. And I think people have suddenly caught up, all those people who think that they can control their lives and they can manage everything, suddenly have gone, but it's not in our control. We can't control the numbers or the spread, or, you know, you can put on a mask. And I think that accepting that and kind of relaxing into it, and just, it's over when it's over.
Yes. So a little piece of my story, which others won't know, but I have shared with you, Lahra, is that my father died when I was 4. And suddenly he was in a plane crash. And my mum and I talk all the time about how people constantly are talking about this terrible thing about that uncertainty. You know, the uncertainty is so hard to deal with. And my mum and I talk all the time about how certainty is a delusion. And for us, like, I've lived an entire life assuming that anything could disappear like that, just assuming that. So, yeah, it's an interesting synergy that you and I have, Lahra, and I can hear how for you must be feeling like COVID is kind of a walk in the park.
Look, it's just another, and this will end and then something else will come up, you know. Yeah.
Absolutely. And tell me, do you think and I have a question that I'm going to get to that question in a minute from Alex, because I wonder whether we have a good relationship with death in our culture, and if we can do death better, because I feel like when people do suffer a loss, often we don't know what to say, and we don't know how to approach our own death. So is there anything you've learned from having lost Ben around how we could maybe do death better and grief better?
Yeah, it was interesting, because it was always his sort of, he always used to say that, you know, we do it so badly, no one wants to talk about it. And we're Jewish, and the Jews have a lot of rituals around death, which really help, because the first thing is it gives you a thing to say. So when someone dies, you say, I wish you a long life. So everybody has something to say. And then after that, you know, you've got a certain amount of time where people visit, and there are all these rituals, but the talking about it is really hard.
Yes.
And I think it comes from the discount. Until you've lost someone very close to you, you think you're immortal. I mean, you know you're going to die, but the amount of people who haven't made a will, which we didn't have, by the way, you know, is testament to people think it happens to someone else. What happened to Ben was a terrible tragedy, but that couldn't happen to me because I don't paraglide. I could be hit by a car tomorrow, and by the way, this might be the last time I see my kids, you know. So it's not about, you know, it is partly that mindfulness. I've changed in that way. You know, I really appreciate moments, and I'm very aware. And my kids. So they said they didn't get a chance to say goodbye to Ben. And so every time, so they started this thing, apart from being terrified something was going to happen to me, which they still live with a bit, they started this thing where every time we left anywhere, they'd say, I love you. And then it became shortened to love. And then it became every time you left a room, they say it to each other and to me, and the end of a phone call, so that every single time you're acknowledging your love.
That's pretty beautiful. Like,
I know, it's sometimes annoying. It's like, I've got to get off the phone. Okay, but just tell me you love it. You haven't said love. I love it.
I can appreciate it would, but at the same time, how often do we not appreciate and value the people in our lives? It's actually it's a really beautiful lesson that we can all take with us. We are going to wrap up in a minute, and I have got some questions to get to, but I can't end the conversation without acknowledging that you are in a new relationship. And tell us, what is that like to find love again, having lost a partner?
You know, it's funny, Campbell's watching, so I'll say hi to him. But I think, and you know, I don't know whether, we haven't talked about this bit of it. He was someone that was a friend, never attracted to each other, but we knew each other in a work context. And then after Ben died, a year after Ben died, Bridget died. And so I connected with him to go, right, what do you need to know? And so it's very unexpected, this growing feeling through the connection that we had. And it was guilt. Like, how can I be feeling this? How can I be feeling this and still really be in love with my husband? How can I be falling in love with someone else while I'm in love with my husband? And, you know, it took us a long time to kind of come to terms with the complexity of that. And now, you know, we're happily in a relationship, 4 of us, because Ben and Bridget are front and center as well. You know, and Campbell went from, what do you think Ben would have said, to these days he'll go, but I think Ben would have, you know, and it's the same, you know, we've discussed a lot the legacy, what we have to keep, what we don't keep, you know, from the relationships that we had, and what's important to carry on with, and what we bring to that together. But it's interesting because a lot of people go, oh, that's so great, you're in a relationship and you're happy now, you know, that you've moved on. And you don't. You take it all with you. It all comes with you. You know, I'm still married and in a relationship.
Wow. And that's not something that you hear often, but I'm assuming that's a very common feeling for people who have lost a partner.
Look, less common than you'd think. In fact, even in the widows group, the overwhelming majority are judgmental of people who, I can never move on. He was the love of my life, and I don't ever think anyone would come up to that. It's like, which is fine, but it's like you are, and it's very hard for other people. I'm very lucky with Campbell because he's also been through the loss. Where I've got friends who've partnered with divorcees, and it's really hard to understand that you will always be in love with this person. You didn't fall out of love with them. You didn't choose to leave. You know, something happened that you didn't want to happen. And it's not like being divorced.
No, and you're living an experience that it's one of those experiences, unless it happens to you, no one can understand it.
That's right.
No one, which must at times be a very lonely space. So I'm very happy that you have your widows group.
Yeah. And my widow boyfriend. So there we go.
Yeah. Wow, absolutely. Again, thank goodness for modern technology. I'm going to read for you some comments, Lahra. Shana says, wishing long life is to ensure we live long enough to remember that person. That's beautiful. I have a question, but it's hang on. Why is that not working? Oh, I don't have a touch screen. That's why that's not working. I just realized I need to use a mouse. I'm a Gen X in a millennial world, Lahra. Okay, so Alex asks, you're so involved communally and in philanthropy, goodness. Do you think that altruism came from Ben, from the experience you had losing him, or from elsewhere?
No, we came to this together. We were very like-minded on my daughter calls it white privilege, which wasn't a term that was around when I started understanding that I wanted to give back because I was lucky. So, and they've taken that on. I think, maybe we were both involved with community, but, my girl's response was to start a not-for-profit in his name called Parachute for Kids, which provides micro grants to kids with, and I'm not going to take away because this is Impact Night for fundraising. We'll do our you know, but that was their response. Let's remember him and do something good for other kids who've been involved with trauma.
It's a really beautiful, even just the inception of that is beautiful, to understand that other children are managing grief and that we could help them in some way is very beautiful. You should be very proud of your kids for thinking of that, but also what a great practical mind as well. Let's help them, you know, that there are things that would help kids who are grieving and we can do it. That's just incredible.
Yeah, they are. And to see it through, it's hard enough to set something like this up. And then the experience of going through applications, making sure they have board meetings with the directors, you know, and all of it. It's not like, hey, we had this great idea and now we'll go back to, you know, dating and studies.
Yeah.
It's a slog, and they get that.
It's incredible. Let me see what else I have very quickly, and then we'll wrap it up and throw it back over to Kathy. But this actually is probably a question for Kathy, so I'll ask that last. Michelle says, Lahra, you sound like an amazingly down-to-earth person and very resilient. Feel blessed that your kids are there to give you support. Do you feel blessed? I'm sure that you do.
So blessed. So blessed.
I think it's extraordinary to hear you talk about, you know, filling the space, but it feels as though you found like a compromise between filling the space and leaving the space open when you need it to be there in memory of Ben. That's
a really good way of putting it. He's very still part of us, you know, but they are extraordinary kids. Look, I'm biased, but I think I know a lot of kids, and I think mine really have a different perspective on the world.
Well, you're supposed to be biased. That's your job. As their mother, you need to be biased. Mandy says, Lahra, you are such a role model, and the way you articulate your experience is enormously helpful. Thank you. Really wonderful. And finally, I have a question which I'm going to ask and then say thank you and throw over to Kathy, because the question is, thank you, Lahra, so inspirational and extremely grateful for both of your honesty and openness on such difficult and personal issues. I would love to share this with some of my loved ones who couldn't join tonight. How can we listen to this again after tonight? So that's a question for Kathy. Lahra, I have so much enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much for your honesty and for, it has been inspirational. Do you think, you know, people say that everything happens for a reason and we learn from our experiences, which I've always thought, you know, how could you say that? Growing up without a father, how could you say losing anyone could be everything happens for a reason? But now I do know it has changed the person I am for the better as far as my compassion and empathy. Is there anything that you've kind of, I don't know, gained? Is gained the right word? I don't know. How does it impact on you and your kids in a way that perhaps is beneficial to the world? I'm rambling because I don't even know how to ask the question.
No, look, I hate it when people say everything happens for a reason, personally, because I push back again. I do not. There was no reason for this, but you have to deal the hand you're dealt. You have to manage it. You know, play the hand you're dealt, and you can make the most of it or not. So you know, the kids led the way. There is no point sitting in a corner crying. He wouldn't have wanted it. It wouldn't benefit anyone, and not his memory, not our lives. And when you lose someone you love, you realize how precious it is anyway. So you've got to, if you've got the chance to love, to make a difference, to be connected, you know, go toward, say yes. That's, you know, I think that's the message of life, isn't it? That would be the way he lived as well.
Go toward. That's amazing. I'm writing that down. Now, the amazing thing is in October, you and I will be on the screen again.
And I get to ask you the questions.
That's right. I'm going to think about how to be authentic, presenting what I need to of my narrative.
Right. And then I'll try and probe and get under the narrative and see if I can find out the real story.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Well, thank you so much, Lahra. You are an inspiration. Love to your 3 children as well. I'm going to throw back to Kathy, who can answer that question. How can we listen to this again after tonight?
Wow, ladies, what can I say? I don't even know where to start. It's been the most fantastic chat. Lahra, you definitely had unscripted authenticity. You shared your vulnerabilities with us, and I think we've all learned so much as a result of that. Whether we've been through traumatic situations similar to yours or otherwise, or whether we've been lucky enough and not had to face that yet, the lessons about redefining relationships, about having force fields of friends, about remembering people with laughter and joy. I think that's really important points that you brought out, and to acknowledge love. I know we do that in our family. We finish every conversation with love you. It's just a habit, but it's not a meaningless habit, and that's what's important. Parachute for kids. Look it up, friends. You can donate to both of us, and better still, how about we have a chat and see if we can collaborate on something together, because we look after women and children in trauma. So, you know, maybe there's an opportunity there for us. Jo, thank you. Just thank you. And you, as you said, it will be your turn soon for unscripted authenticity and vulnerability, which is what you show us all the time anyway, so we know we're going to get that. Everybody, next fortnight, we've got Mark Ballard. Now, that may be a name that's not familiar to many of you. Let me just throw a few words and adjectives, not in a sentence, but just to get you thinking. Inspirational, philanthropic, India, schools with no plumbing and fresh water, one man makes a difference, girls start getting educated as a result. Tune in and hear the bigger story behind that. To answer your question, or the guest's question, we have been on Facebook Live as well, so that will be there if anybody goes to Facebook Impact for Women, our page there. This interview will be live, and if we're clever enough, we'll pop it up on YouTube as well. Ladies, thank you, thank you, thank you. To our guests, thank you, thank you, thank you. And we look forward to seeing you in a fortnight. Good night, everybody.
Bye.